眼见到你就特别喜欢你，我们认识，跟我在一起好吗？说你嫁给我啊！
有钱了不起？
行了，打车去！干嘛 ？Yes, I asked for separate bills.
Why?
Because I invite your friend.
No.
It's fucking you, not your friend. And your friend ate all the chicken and all the drink.
Why
No.
would you have my friend pay for her own shit?
She
The
paid
fuck?
her own shit. I invite her. Exactly.
that's
Pay for your own
embarrassing.
shit.
Dear young men of today, as a millennial in my 30s now, I must say you have been dealt a really bad hand by men of generations past. You probably spend a lot of time wondering how things got this bad. Why is it so hard to get a job? Why is everything so damn expensive? Why is dating so tedious and unfun these days? The thing is, I could do a complicated historical macro analysis on all the factors that led us to this point. But there's a much simpler explanation that is the ultimate root cause of all these issues. Men of generations past simply set a horrible example on what a man should do in life. Young men today often get labeled as soft, lazy, and entitled by the mainstream media and by older generations. You often hear rhetoric such as your grandfathers went to die in wars, or, I used to work my ass off, you kids are so lazy. But here's the thing, they actually have it completely backwards. They're the ones who are actually soft and lazy. Let's establish one thing we can all agree on. In the modern age, we no longer define laziness based on lack of physical activity. A hedge fund manager who sits at his desk all day does much less physical labor than a construction worker who actually moves around and builds stuff. But because of the toxic, consumerist society we live in, we idolize the hedge fund manager for being successful while looking down on blue-collar workers. This is because diligence is not just about physical work. It's also about mental work, such as critical thinking and analysis. So with that being said, let's not be lazy and use our own critical thinking abilities to see which generations were actually soft and lazy. There's a common misconception that dating and society in general were a patriarchal utopia for men of generations past, and it's only recently when things became difficult for men. This couldn't be further from the truth. Throughout history, men were thrown into wars where they died horrible deaths. They got married into a rigged family court system. They lost their houses, their life savings, and their kids over 50% of the time. Men were expected to sacrifice everything for women and society in exchange for absolutely nothing in return. To be fair, society went to great lengths to brainwash them to do this, but almost every man just accepted this crap deal without ever questioning it. That is, after all, the convenient and easy thing to do. Just go with the flow and obey the system no matter how unfair it gets. This to me is true laziness, not physical laziness, but intellectual laziness. It's also soft in the sense that they didn't have the courage to speak out against these injustices. So when you unplug from the matrix and look at things from this new perspective, you will see that it's traditional men and not modern men who were soft and lazy. This softness and laziness led to so many catastrophic consequences for traditional men. They died horrible deaths in wars. They worked themselves into the ground till they developed serious health issues. They got wrecked by women in divorce courts. They accepted the shit sandwich society force-fed them and were too lazy to push back against it. Around 5 years ago is when I first started noticing the public discourse around men's issues were slowly starting to change. That is also around the time when Gen Z came of age, which is absolutely not a coincidence. It got to a point where even the leftist mainstream media was forced to acknowledge these issues. I first started speaking out about these issues when I was in my early 20s, almost a decade ago now, but my blue-pilled millennial peers were having none of it. They thought I was crazy for even thinking that men didn't have the easiest lives ever. So when I saw public opinion had shifted, it was a great moment of vindication for me. But more importantly, it gave me tremendous hope that the next generation of men would be able to change the world in ways mine never could. I did, however, have one lingering question mark in my head. How exactly would they do it? Fighting back against the injustices of the world is never easy, no matter who you are. But it's especially difficult for men because of the simple fact that society doesn't care about men. The inherent beauty and innocence of women means they naturally gain free sympathy points. Also, since men are naturally perceived as more violent and threatening, You can't organize a massive group protest on the street and expect it to gain the same public support as when women do it. Although it was very promising that Gen Z men saw the problems and were speaking out about it, there's still a long way to go between recognizing problems and actually creating meaningful change. As much as I like to rag on my own generation, there were small, fringe groups of smart individuals who did organize men's movements and rallies. But the media simply shot them down as racist, misogynistic incels. And when you're fighting against such an oppressive system who controls the narrative on every front, it's really hard to get anything off the ground. So although it was nice to see that Gen Z men recognized the problems that no other generation did, I wondered if they'd be smart enough to come up with an actual solution. It turns out they absolutely were. Quiet, peaceful protests have always been more effective than blazing displays of anarchy in the long run. And young men today might just be in the midst of what is the most epic, clever display of peaceful protest ever. Whether it's refusing to date, refusing to go to college, refusing to work, staying home playing video games, or all of the above, young men are really putting the clamps on a society that has screwed them over for far too long. As much as these blue-haired feminists want to shout that they don't need a man, unless they're prepared to go live in the wilderness without any technology, that statement is just objectively false. Gen Z men have cleverly realized one thing. A society cannot function without young men. That is the cold, hard truth. This is why there's such a heavy emphasis on brainwashing young men to sacrifice themselves for society from such an early age. You see it in everything from movies to the media to our education system. The propaganda is everywhere. Individually speaking, a young man has almost no leverage in life. He doesn't make much money yet, so he can't demand a decent job. He doesn't have much resources to offer a woman, so women have all the leverage in dating. But collectively speaking, it's a different story. What you don't have individually, you do have collectively when it comes to strength in numbers. If every young guy quits the system and refuses to play this rigged, exploitative game, guess what happens? Birth rates plummet. Companies go out of business. Women start to complain as they now have to work. Does this all sound familiar? If you follow the news at all, these headlines are all they talk about these days. They're clearly panicking, and that can only mean one thing. This quiet, peaceful rebellion from young men today is gradually starting to work. For too long, society and women have exploited and profited off the cheap labor and sacrifice of young men without giving them anything in return. But young men today are having none of it. Some have even gone as far as to say they'd rather die than work a 9-to-5. Although I wouldn't recommend that, I do certainly understand that sentiment. The most beautiful thing about all this is there's no narrative angle the mainstream media can try to use to stop this. We all know that shaming and demonizing men for being violent and aggressive has been their go-to tactic since forever. But there are no outward aggressive protests here. No threats of violence or chaos. Just a bunch of guys peacefully opting out of this society that hates them anyways, and focusing on what makes them happy. Although Gen Z men have made tremendous leaps and bounds of progress that other generations could only dream of, there's still a long way to go. The toxic cultural beliefs about men that led us to this point have dominated human civilization for thousands of years, so it's going to take a bit more than 5 to undo it all. But as you guys can see, the tremendous progress you've made so far in such a short amount of time has already got the mainstream media and society panicking. So you're already doing very well. You just have to hold strong and keep the momentum. Don't let anyone try to guilt trip and shame you back into society, as they absolutely will do everything in their power to do so. They need you more than you need them. This might come as a surprise given the whole tone and topic of the video, but I'm actually not completely against the traditional route. Working a 9-to-5 job, supporting a family, and contributing to society are not inherently bad things. The problem is when society expects these things from young men while at the same time actively hating them, demonizing them, and creating horrible economic conditions that make it miserable to do these things. As for all you young Gen Z chads watching this video right now, my best advice to you outside of the epic quiet rebellion you're already doing is to try and find ways to survive independent of society. There are actually many ways to do this now, unlike before, and I'll probably make an entire video guide on this one of these days. Some examples of things you can do is learn an online side hustle, live with your parents, learn to invest, travel abroad, and live in cheaper countries. The list goes on. One day, when society realizes its mistakes and is ready to have a conversation about giving you a fair wage, a society that cares about and appreciates your contributions, a family that loves and supports you, then and only then can we maybe discuss a re-entry into society. But until that day comes, just hold strong and keep doing what you're doing. Thanks for watching today's video. It took quite a lot of time and effort to make it, so if you enjoyed it, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. Until next time.